Mr. Julian.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair, to start. It's great to see everybody again and our new members of our committee. This is the first time we've dealt with such a constricted space for clause by clause. So I did want to raise this formally that when we're doing clause by clause, we take it very seriously. As you know, we've gone through a number of bills. We're dealing with amendments. We're dealing with the bill itself. We're dealing with justifications. We're dealing with the actual vote. Having this constricted a space makes that impossible. I don't want to push over into Madame Michaud's space, so I really believe for subsequent meetings, we need to have a space that is large enough for us to properly do our work.
Appreciate and acknowledge those remarks. We've actually abbreviated the witness table here to give you a little bit more room, and they could conceivably move down one more if you need a little bit more. But I take your point. We will ask the clerk to see if we can address this problem going forward. Mr. Shipley, go ahead on the point of order.
Just to show how great this committee is going to work this time and get a lot of good work done, I'm going to agree with my friend down at the end from NDP. It is not like we used to have, and I have 3 binders here. No way I'm going to be able to open them all, so it would be nice, and I'm going to agree with my friend down at the end. If something can be done for next meeting, we'd all probably appreciate it. So thank you for bringing that up.
The usual neutral chair also agrees. So, Mr. Motz, please.
And I would just add to that for today's meeting, I would invite Mr. Julian maybe to take up space in the back somewhere there, and if he needs more room, you know, just wanted to help you out.
Or even in another room.
Well, no, stay in here. Stay here.
The generosity of this committee knows no bounds. Right? Anyway, thank you, Mr. Julian, and others for intervening. We will do what we can do. I know I came into this room, I found it was kind of very foreshortened, and it's very strange because we're used to having a lot more room to spread out and wave our hands and stuff. So anyway, we shall continue with convening the meeting. So welcome to meeting number 73 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to a House Order of June 23rd, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'm going to skip over some of this because we've all heard it before, and a reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. So we shall welcome to all the new people on the committee, and I would like to thank all the people who are no longer on the committee for their service. And this leaves us an opening for vice chair, for the Conservative vice chair. So we need to proceed to elect the Conservative vice chair. Did you wish to speak before that?
No, I will just after briefly.
Okay.
Sorry, it was
Campaigning is allowed.
No, I'm good. Hopefully, I
Okay.
don't need too much.
Yeah. So I'll pass over to our esteemed clerk, and he'll conduct the vote.
Thank you. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair. Conformément à l'article 106.2, le premier vice-président doit être un député de l'opposition officielle.
Pursuant to 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
I move to nominate Doug Shipley.
Il est proposé par M. Danoid.
Mr. Denoy suggests that Mr. Shipley be elected.
I would like to second the nomination of Doug Shipley.
Perfect. Is there any other motions? I don't see none. So is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Yes.
I see. So I declare the motion carried, and Mr. Doug Shipley duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
Welcome to our new vice chair, and be careful what you ask for. Okay, did you wish to speak?
Very briefly, not even really about that. You know, I'm not usually one to speak and waste a lot of time, so I will just say thank you to everyone. Thank you for nominating me. And I would like to publicly thank our past vice chair, Raquel Danko, who obviously is going to be leaving tomorrow as her last day for a while. I think it's no secret anymore as to why she's heading out, so I want to wish her best of luck with her future endeavor of a +1 in the family. I don't know if it could be +2 or 3. Who knows? She's never told me. She's going to maybe not be happy with that one, I say it. But I wanted to congratulate her on it and wish her best of luck and thank her for all the great work she did here and her mentorship. And hopefully we'll do as good a job in her absence. So best of luck to her while she's gone.
Thank you. So members, your subcommittee met on Monday to consider business of the committee and agreed on a number of items. You've all received by email a copy of the 5th report of the subcommittee on agenda and procedure. Does the committee wish to adopt the report? And I do have a copy if you need me to read it. So,
Can we speak to the report?
I'll move it.
okay, so the motion's on the floor, so you can speak to the.
This is to the subcommittee report, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just briefly to it, Mr. Clerk. I was unable to make it to the subcommittee meeting. Mr. Wood was there in my absence. There was just a couple things I wanted to mention. First of all, Bill C-26 is a rather large, very in-depth bill. And there is going to be a large list. We actually don't have our site completely formulated yet. We're working on that as we're transitioning through the offices. A large list of witnesses. And I have serious concerns that 5 meetings are going to be enough. This is a bill that's very serious, especially with, even just what took place this week with our own systems being down here, that I think this is going to take an extra time. And I'm a little concerned about 5 meetings is too tight. Perhaps we can just check with the will of the table to see if we're going to have that in stone, or if we can be a little bit more flexible on the 5 meetings, knowing there's going to be so many.
It doesn't say so in this report, but there was discussion around the number of meetings, and it was felt that this is a good place to start, but it's certainly within the purview of the committee to extend that if it is the will of the committee to do so. I guess what I'm asking for at this point is concurrence in or ratification of the decision. I have Ms. O'Connell followed by Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that I certainly don't want to speak for everyone, but I think the position was that we have C-20 today. I know from the previous committee there are motions and studies that our members are interested in, and for the sake of trying to establish a calendar, we couldn't it's not the best decision to just leave it open. It was 4 meetings plus 1 with the minister, and that at the time that we've exhausted that, the committee can come back or subcommittee can come back and have the conversation. We're certainly not trying to shut that down, but we just feel for the sake of the calendar, we need some planning parameters and felt that that was fairly reasonable. But we're certainly open to the conversation, but leaving it open-ended, I think, is just not useful to be able to plan our agendas and other studies, et cetera.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Julian?
Moi, j'appuie le rapport du sous-comité.
I support the subcommittee report. I do agree that if we need more meetings, that is a decision that the committee could make. I think today we could adopt the report and then review the number of witnesses, and depending on how we feel about the bill, I do understand that it might take more than 5 meetings, but 5 is a good start. Personally, I'm very open to adding days later on.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that it's important that we at least have a placeholder on what we anticipate to be, but we all know, I guess we're naive to think that we're going to get anything through to review this thoroughly in 5 meetings, with one of them being the minister. And we should ensure that we have it, identified somewhere that this is an important bill. We've all been anticipating this study significantly, and in a lot of different areas it overlaps. So we can't pigeonhole. Let's not pigeonhole ourselves into even if we say, well, we need to add 1 or 2 extra meetings, let's not do that. Let's figure out our witness list. Let's determine once we get our witness list to see how much time we think we might need, and let's be generous with it because it's going to impact our governments and the impact of national security for a decade or more with this legislation. So we need to ensure we do it right.
That brings us to one of the points of the report is that we agreed in subcommittee that the preliminary witness list, the people's nomination for witnesses should be done by the end of next week. And I bring everyone's attention to the analyst's report. The analyst did a quick summary of C-26 with suggested witnesses, and that's a good starting point, I suggest. And once again, if once we see the witnesses, and I mean, of course, the clerk will sort out the witnesses according to party kind of standing and number of meetings. But if we need to extend that, I mean, that's open to the committee to do so. So, are we ready to vote on? No,
Sorry.
Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Sorry, just one other thing, and I agree with everything that's been said, and yeah, if we're willing to amend that, and I like what Mr. Mott said, once we have, I think, our list of witnesses, it'll probably be a little easier, but if we've already got some agreement that the 5's not in stone, we'll adjust that as we go forward. I thought this would also be a good place, since we're talking about the subcommittee on the agenda. I did put forward a notice of motion that it would be nice to move this now. And
Sorry,
see if we-
Mr. Chair,
see if
point
we
of
can get
order.
this-
There's a motion on the floor.
Oh, your motion's on the floor.
Yes, thank you. So,
Just one more point on the agenda of the committee.
Yes.
Moving forward, if I may. One of the things that we have to be mindful of as well is, I understand NSICOP has sent the RCMP mandate study back to the PM. It's in the PM's office. He's got 30 days to respond. And I anticipate that'll be a study that'll be front and center for this committee as well in the very near future. So we should probably identify that as something that we're going to have to look at as a committee as well.
yeah, in that regard, a review of the NSICOP, I believe, is mandated every 5 years, but the legislation is somewhat vague. Was it something else?
This is different, yeah. This
Okay,
is,
then I will backtrack, and we'll have to stand advised on we'll see where that goes. All right, can we have a vote on this? Is it the will of the committee to accept the report of the subcommittee on agenda and procedures? Report number 5. All in favor? All opposed? I think that's a slam dunk. Okay, thank you. All right. Here you go. You can look back. Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. I did circulate a motion in both official languages that I'd like to put on the floor right now, please, if I could. And that is that the committee hold no less than 5 meetings to undertake a study on Paul Bernardo's transfer from a maximum security prison to a medium security prison. That the committee invite the former Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino, to appear alone for no less than 2 hours to explain the transfer. That the committee invite Commissioner Ann Kelly and Deputy Minister Sean Tupper to appear for no less than 1 hour to explain the transfer. That the committee invite the current Minister of Public Safety to appear alone for no less than 2 hours to discuss that the government plans are to prevent transfers of dangerous offenders to a medium security prison in the future, and that the committee report their findings to the House.
Thank you. I do acknowledge receiving the notice of motion, and it is in order at this time. It would be kind of, I hate to kind of take up witnesses and time for this, but it is in order. So I have Mr. Baldinelli, Mr. Baldinelli followed by Mr. Motz to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank you for this opportunity to appear and to speak to this motion. I asked to appear because of the importance of this motion, and the importance of this motion to my community. The name Paul Bernardo is synonymous with evil in my community, and the horrific crimes that were committed to Leslie Mahaffey, who was only 14, Kristen French, who was only 15, resonate and still impact my community today. It was the transfer decision which brought forward a number of community concerns, and I was approached by friends of the victims asking us, what can we do to ensure that this type of activity or this type of transfer never happens again? So at that time, I worked with my colleagues in the leader's office as well as public security and justice departments. I came forward with my private member's bill 342, which would require all court-ordered dangerous offenders and mass murderers to be permanently assigned a maximum security classification. And it would also repeal the Liberals' least restrictive environment standard for assigning inmates to prisons and restore the language of necessary restrictions that the previous government had put in place. But I have also worked with my colleagues here to see that we come forward, because my private member's bill is low in the priority list. And we come forward and see that we look at this and see that it doesn't happen again. In fact, I was contacted by those same friends of Kristen French, and they asked what they could do. And they had come forward with a letter to this committee, and I believe many of you would have received that letter. And they asked, and I'm just going to quote from the letter itself, and it says, as childhood best friends of Kristen French, one of the victims of these horrendous crimes, we call on the Standing Committee of Public Safety to immediately initiate a study to investigate this matter further, to answer many of the questions concerned Canadians have. Even in Niagara, the city of Thorold, and the city of St. Catharines, where these horrendous crimes were committed, are looking for answers and assurances, and they have expressed their desire to keep Paul Bernardo in a maximum security placement. Please see the additional resolutions that were passed by both those communities. And it is my understanding the city of Niagara Falls, as well as the town of Niagara Lake, are also undertaking resolutions in support of that as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe it's an incumbent on us, to the memory of those victims and to the actions and the concerns that have been expressed by my constituents and other Canadians, that we look at this issue, that we bring forward the ministers responsible and find out exactly why this was allowed to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Motz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank my colleagues for bringing this forward. While the events of the bring us to have this conversation did not occur in my riding, I certainly have many people asking about it and have asked me personally about this response and the government's decision. And I just want to go through two things. One is there was an order paper question placed to government in June by our colleague, Mr. Caputo. And he asked, and the reason I bring this up today is because it talks about, how often does this happen? We've heard in the House, Chair, that, is this something that's happening regularly? So that was a question that was asked. And so the order paper question came back from Correction Services Canada. The question was asked, with regard to Correction Services Canada, A, how many dangerous offenders are currently housed in minimum security, medium security prisons, and B, how many offenders convicted of multiple murders are currently in medium security prisons? The Correctional Services Canada came back and says that this report that I'm about to provide today is based on information entered into the offender management system, and its accuracy depends on the timeliness and accuracy of the data entered in the system. Now, in the 1940s, our criminal code was amended to include provisions that gave the courts the authority to designate certain repeat offenders as habitual criminals and offenders convicted of certain sex crimes as dangerous sexual offenders. These provisions allowed for an indeterminate or life sentence. Dangerous offender legislation came into effect in Canada on October 15th, 1977, replacing the habitual offender and dangerous sexual offender provisions that were established, or that were abolished then. The dangerous offender is an individual given an indeterminate or a determinate sentence on the basis of a particularly violent crime or pattern of series of violent offenses, where it is judged that the offender's behavior is unlikely to be inhibited by normal standards of behavioral restraint. See Section 753 of the Criminal Code. It should be noted that all in-custody dangerous offenders, dangerous sexual offenders, and habitual criminals were included in the response. So in custody in this report includes all active offenders incarcerated in a Correctional Services of Canada facility, offenders on temporary absence from a facility, offenders who are temporarily detained in a CSC facility, and offenders on remand in a CSC facility. Now, the stats are to the end of 2022-2023 calendar year, so as of March 31st of 2023. There are the number of offenders with dangerous offender designation in custody at the end of March of 2023 by the offender security level. So in maximum security, there was 99 in custody dangerous offenders. In medium security, there was 580 dangerous offenders. In minimum security, there was 57 for a total of 736. And the table below that I'm about to provide presents the number of offenders with at least 2 counts of murder on their current sentence who were in custody at the end of March of 2023 with a medium offender security. And that includes first-degree murder, second-degree murder, capital murder of a person less than 18, and non-capital murder, as well as any break-and-enter offenses where one of the murder offenses listed previously was committed during that break-and-enter. So there was 239 offenders listed with at least 2 counts of murder on their current sentence of in custody at the end of March in medium security prisons. Now that is a bit of a concern. It should be a serious concern for Canadians. And I guess the point that I want to make in this, and I have some notes prepared and I want to stick to them because I think it's important for those of us in this committee to understand as well as Canadians. Now, the Liberal government made a decision that actually shocked and dismayed Canadians with this, with Paul Bernardo. He is potentially one of the most notorious serial killer and rapists in our history, and was transferred from out of maximum to a medium security facility, and it's their decision to do nothing about it that has caused concern for Canadians. The decision has ignited outrage, and rightfully so, Mr. Chair. Despite what Ann Kelly, or the Commissioner of Correctional Services, said, that the decision to transfer Bernardo was sound and that the review committee concluded that the decisions to reclassify Paul Bernardo to medium and transfer him followed all applicable laws and policies, end quote. Bernardo's heinous crimes are etched in the memories of those, as Mr. Baldinelli has said, who lived through the darkness of his actions, and the pain he inflicted on the victims and their families is immeasurable. The Canadian government needs to ensure that crimes, especially the most heinous crimes, have real consequences. Our Conservatives and our leader, Mr. Poilievre, have been saying to the media that we agree that CSC followed the law in transferring Bernardo. But we also said that the law must be changed. Specifically, a 2018 Criminal Code amendment that requires inmates to be held in the least restrictive environment possible while in custody. Now, whose job is it to do that? It's ours. I would beseech this committee to understand that that now job rests with this committee. And we shouldn't be passing that responsibility on or ignoring it because the duty lies with us. Local communities that were most affected by Bernardo's monstrous act have spoken out. And they are calling for actions, as we heard Mr. Baldinelli speak about. The cities of Thorold and St. Catharines have taken a courageous stand expressing their grave concerns about Mr. Bernardo's transfer and demanding that he be sent back to a maximum security prison where he belongs. If the Liberals are willing to let the most notorious serial killers and rapists in our Canadian history out of maximum security, then what purpose does maximum security prisons have? Alternatively, Mr. Poilievre has called on the Prime Minister to issue a directive to require that all mass murderers to remain in maximum security prison for the entirety of their sentence, or for Parliament to pass a Conservative bill, as Mr. Baldinelli has spoken to, with the same requirement. Our Conservative leader speaks for all of us when he says Bernardo should never be out of maximum security prison, and to allow it is an injustice to the victims and to their families on whom he enacted his terrible outrages, end of quote. Our Conservative demand, however, seems to have fallen on deaf ears, and they have been sent to the Prime Minister, the previous and new ministers of public safety, and to local Emprise, Mr. Biddle, and welcome to our committee, Chris.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
And Vance Badaway. But sadly, they've gone on.
Mr. Biddle on a point of order?
This pain in my community, Chair, is real. And this is being used as a partisan attack, used as a filibuster to prevent us from debating legislation. This is disgusting, Mr. Chair. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should all be ashamed of yourselves.
Point of order.
Mr. Baldinelli comes with this, I believe, with true intention, but the rest of them, it is disgusting. It's disgusting. Shake your heads.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Biddle. It is not a point of order, but I appreciate the sentiments. The emotions run high on this matter, as well they should.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Motz, please carry on.
Thank you very much, sir. So rather than addressing the issue head-on, my colleague who's just spoken, when this was brought up in the House, has chosen to deflect blame, accusing those proposing solutions
Point
and
of order,
expressing
Mr. Speaker.
Concerns of as
Mr.
playing
Biddle on a
politics.
point of order, please.
I have not deflected any blame, Mr. Speaker. The member is unfortunately misleading this committee, and I don't know why this is, again, being used as a filibuster to prevent us from
Not a
actually
filibuster.
debating
Not a point of order,
legislation
Mr. Chair.
on this. It's shocking to use a serial killer and a
point
horrific
of order,
incident
Mr. Chair.
in St. Catharines, in Niagara,
Not a point of
to
order,
engage
Mr.
in a
Chair.
political filibuster. Shocking.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. It is correct, it's not a point of order, but I'll make that decision, thank you. Carry on, Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, we see a pattern of division and blame shifting, even from the deepest backbenches of the Liberal government, rather than taking responsibility and rectifying the problems that they themselves have created. The majority Liberal government paved the way for this transfer of Mr. Bernardo by passing Bill C-83 back in the day, which was supported by only the Liberals and the disgraced Liberal Raj Grewal. This bill prioritizes a least restrictive environment for prisoners, effectively reversing a policy established by the previous Conservative government, which imposed a tougher standard on dangerous offenders. This reversal was cited by Correctional Services Canada to justify Bernardo's transfer. Now, months after this shocking transfer, the government continues to let down the families of victims and the communities forever scarred by Bernardo's crimes. And despite our new public safety minister, we are witnessing the same type of refusal, the same kind of refusal, to use the legal authority to direct Correctional Services Canada to ensure that every mass murderer serves their time in a maximum security facility. With a level of ineffectiveness that ministers could deem appropriate, the former Minister of Public Safety did issue a directive to Correctional Services Canada. Unfortunately, he missed the point, and he missed it entirely. The directive only covered the way that victims are notified about transfers and their classifications, not a reversal, is what should have been done of this transfer. Conservatives will stand idle, or will not stand idly by and let this injustice persist. That is why we've introduced the legislation, which has been mentioned, which mandates that multiple murderers and dangerous offenders like Bernardo serve their entire sentences behind the walls of a maximum security prison. We will bring justice and safety back to our communities. On the issue of public safety, we have seen a government that has admitted its failure to protect Canadians from foreign interference, and we've witnessed the replacement of arguably an unfit public safety minister with a new one who seems to follow those orders of his predecessor. Yet Mr. Bernardo remains in minimum security, outside of where he should be, and violent crime continues to rise on our streets. To those Canadians who are watching today, Conservatives know that this situation is unacceptable and have the desire to do something about it. Victims' rights should never come second to those of dangerous and violent offenders. We must take a stand and rectify the mistakes of this Liberal government. Mr. Bernardo's transfer should never have occurred, and it should not stand. He belongs in maximum security prison for the rest of his life. To prevent further transfers like this and to ensure that victims' rights are upheld, Conservatives have introduced Mr. Baldinelli's Private Members Bill C-342. This legislation will permanently assign a maximum security classification to multiple murderers and court-ordered dangerous offenders. It will repeal the Liberal least restrictive environment standard and restore the language of necessary restrictions that the previous Conservative government had in place. And Mr. Chair, it's about time. We call on the Minister to issue a directive today and reverse the transfer of Mr. Bernardo. We will continue to champion the rights of victims, and a common sense conservative government will bring about safer streets and prioritize victims' rights by reversing this flawed legislation. We will ensure that people like Paul Bernardo remain where they belong. My colleagues and I, we have a commitment to justice, public safety, and the rights of victims. We will fight to ensure that our communities are safe, that justice is served, and that the voices of victims and their families are heard. If colleagues across the way are not able to ensure this, or Liberal ministers are not able to ensure this, it will become the work of this committee to do that. Simply not passing on our responsibility. The duty lies with us, and I ask that you consider the magnitude of our responsibility today and to do what's right. To reverse this transfer, and let's ensure it never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. So I have Mr. Shipley followed by Mr. Lloyd. I'm wondering if there's a sense of how long this matter will take today, because if we're going to take very long, I would recommend that we excuse the witnesses and allow us to carry on in the fullness of this. Okay, Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to start off by indicating that this is not a filibuster. This is. I've been in meetings and heard you filibuster. I know what a filibuster is, Mr. Biddle. And this is not a filibuster. We will get around to a vote on this.
Speak to the chair, please.
Is he allowed to just yellow comments?
Well, no.
Well, there you go.
But even so,
I'm going to respond to them if
it
someone.
doesn't make it better if we all break the rules. So,
I agree.
Please, everyone, please do address members through the chair.
So I will assure the committee this is not a filibuster. This is some concerned MPs stating their voices, and we will get around to voting this today. So I'm here today, as I'm sure many members on both sides have had many emails, many calls, many comments, many questions about Paul Bernardo. Quite frankly, even saying his name doesn't come easy. So we're going to allow it or not?
Sorry?
We're going to allow this or not?
I didn't hear anything. So
Well, I certainly did. So
I was focused on something else.
yeah, I know.
So if I missed something, I
I know.
apologize, and we'll.
So on June 1st, Canadians learned that Correctional Service Canada was transferring a mass killer, a serial rapist, and torturer, Paul Bernardo, from the maximum security prison to a medium security prison. We wouldn't be discussing this here today. This was brought up at subcommittee. We tried to put it in there, Chair, and it didn't get put in. So we decided to bring this up today to see if we can somehow get this in as a study. If it was approved or on Monday, we would not be having this discussion here today. So I have pages and pages of what I could be discussing and reading, but I don't want to be accused of being partisan whatsoever. I'm going to use other people's words. They're not my words. So the first I have is a letter from Thorold City Council dated June 20th, 2023. And it's re Paul Bernardo. Thorold City Council, at its meeting held June 20th, 2023, passed the following resolution. That the mayor be requested to prepare and send a letter to Corrections Canada, local area members of parliament, expressing support for keeping Paul Bernardo in a maximum security placement. A copy of the letter sent to Commissioner Ann Kelly is attached herein. And I was on city council for many years, and sometimes we'd send this letters, and I'd often wonder if anybody here actually read them. So I'm going to make sure this gets in the record. It's not very long. I'm just going to read it. It says, Dear Commissioner, support for keeping Paul Bernardo maximum security placement. I'm ready to express the unwavering support of the City of Thorold in favor of keeping Paul Bernardo in a maximum security placement within the Correctional Service Canada system. As the Mayor of the City of Thorold, I represent a community deeply affected by the heinous crimes committed by Mr. Bernardo and remain committed to advocating for the safety and well-being of our residents. The gravity of Mr. Bernardo's crimes and the devastating impact they had on the lives of innocent individuals and their families cannot be understated. Our community, along with the wider Niagara region, continues to bear the scars left by these reprehensible actions. It is of utmost importance that we prioritize public safety and ensure that those who pose a significant risk to society are appropriately confined and monitored. We acknowledge that decisions regarding the placement of individuals within the correctional system require a comprehensive evaluation of various factors, including the level of risk they present and the potential of harms for others. In the case of Paul Bernardo, his past actions and the severity of his offenses demand the highest level of security to safeguard our community from any potential danger. Furthermore, we are aware that public safety is a shared responsibility among different levels of government and local communities. To that end, I am copying Niagara's local area municipalities on this letter to ensure that they are aware of our stance, and should they feel inclined, join us in expressing their support for keeping Mr. Bernardo in a maximum security placement. The residents of the City of Thorold and the Niagara region deserve to live in an environment where they feel safe and secure. We trust that you will carefully consider the concerns of our community, along with the collective voices of others within the Niagara region, when making any decisions regarding the placement and management of Paul Bernardo. Thank you for your attention to this matter. We look forward to a response and remain committed to working with you to ensure the safety and well-being not only of our community, but all communities across Canada. Sincerely, Terry Ugolini, Mayor of the City of Thorold. And I hope that was a tough one. I hope I said that okay, and I apologize for that. And again, not my words, but I have one more letter. It won't take long, Mr. Clerk. It is from St. Catharines, and it is, Dear Prime Minister, at its meeting held on July 24th, 2023, St. Catharines City Council approved the following motion. Whereas the Correctional Service of Canada has published their report regarding the transfer of an inmate from maximum security Millhaven Institution to medium security La Macasa Institution, and whereas Timothy Danson, Counsel for the French and Mahaffey families, has released preliminary observations on the report, and whereas Timothy Danson's observations include that nothing has changed with the inmate in the past 30 years, the parole board has found twice that the inmate has no remorse, empathy, or insight into his crimes, that the requirement that the choice of penitentiary must be the least restrictive if the offender cannot be applied mechanically to all offenders. The punishment aspect of this inmate sentence does not appear to have been factored into the transfer, and that the privacy of the offender was put ahead of the victims, their families, and the public. Therefore, be it resolved that St. Catharines City Council requests that the Government of Canada review and consider legislation changes to ensure transparency in the correction and parole system, and examine the guidelines around moving dangerous offenders and sadistic psychopaths who have not exhibited any remorse, empathy, or insight into their crimes into medium security prisons. And be it further resolved that this resolution be circulated to the Minister of Public Safety, the Honourable Marco Mendicino, the Minister of Justice, and Attorney General of Canada, the Honourable David Lametti, MP Chris Biddle, MP Vance Badaway, MP Dean Allison, MP Tony Baldinelli, and Prime Minister Trudeau. If you have any questions, please contact the Office of the Clerk, and it's signed Kristen Sullivan, City Clerk. So as I said, Chair, I just wanted to put those on the record. Those aren't my words. That's from two city councils who lived through this. And I think maybe one of the issues is with this, I am 57 years old. I remember Paul Bernardo. It was 30 years ago. I would imagine most people under 45 years old, or roughly, don't have as clear a recollection of just how vile this individual was. This man caused havoc around the city. I was living downtown Toronto at the time, at Yonge and St. Clair, with my then fiance. She and many women like herself were afraid to go out. He was referred to as the Scarborough Rapist. I did print off a sheet that has all of his heinous actions. Commencing, I'm not going to read them all. My original intention was to read them all, just to show people just how nasty and vile this guy is.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Mr. Biddle on a point of order.
This was promised to not be a filibuster, but we're going to read the horrific details
No, I
of this
actually said I
person's
wasn't going to
crime
read it.
when we're
No.
going, when we
Well, I can
acknowledge,
now.
when all of us acknowledge how terrible this is. This is being used as a partisan, for partisan gain, and it is disgusting, Mr. Chair. These members should know better. They're making individuals wait, making witnesses wait. This is just a filibuster. The glee for which they drop the name, which I won't even use because it does cause so much pain in my community. I am under 45 years old, Mr. Shipley. I do understand how significant this is. You don't. Perhaps we should move on and stop using this as a filibuster.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Not a point of order, it's true. As I said, I know emotions are high, and they should be, so we'll try and keep this under control. It would be good if we're going to continue for very long, it would be nice to be able to release the witnesses and bring them back next time. Anyway,
I'm wrapping up, Chair.
Okay.
I actually said I wasn't going to read it. My intentions were to read it. If Mr. Biddle was maybe listening to what I was saying, I said I wasn't going to read the list, but he made me rethink that, but I won't read it. What I'm trying to say is because I've had people approach me who were younger and say they didn't know. They've never heard of Paul Bernardo. They don't know who he is.
Well, I can't time limit you anyway, as long as you're on topic.
I'm wrapping it up right
You
now.
got it. So.
Reluctantly, I am, because I think people need to know just who this vile human being is. He has caused tremendous hurt throughout the country, throughout definitely certain areas, and basically what we're looking for on our side is just a study to discuss how this happened, how we can make sure this never happens again. No partisanship from my words. Every single word I read was from 2 city councils, not even in my area. So with that, I'll leave it at that and see what my colleagues have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. We have Mr. Lloyd, followed by Ms. O'Connell, followed by Madame Michaud. Go ahead, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, this is definitely a tough issue. And for me personally, you know, my family was the victim. My cousins were murdered just a few short years ago. An entire family wiped out by a mass killer. And as you know, somebody who's had family who've gone through this, I would want to know if the killer, and in this case, the killer did not live, but I would want to know if the killer was alive, that I would be consulted by Correctional Services Canada before any decisions were made on a transfer. And I think, that's the thing about bureaucracies, is that, bureaucracies, left unchecked, have a tendency to become unemotional and legalistic. And sometimes the rights of victims and their families aren't put as the highest priority. And it's our job as parliamentarians who represent the people, who represent these victims' families, to make sure that the Government of Canada always puts the rights of victims and their families first. And so that's why I believe it is an essential role of this committee to review this. There might be some arguments made that this committee might not have time to do something like this. Those are wrong. Judging by the schedule that we've discussed at subcommittee, we have at least 8 meetings potentially available before Christmas. I believe we're being very reasonable in proposing 5 meetings on this subject, but I know we would be open to, if there's an issue with 5 meetings, I know we would be open to further discussion on that matter. And with that, I'll cede the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Go now to Ms. O'Connell. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move an amendment, and then I'd like to speak to it. I'm going to move in the motion, it says that the committee hold and here's where my amendment starts, that the committee hold a meeting on the rights of victims of crime and the security, reclassification, and transfer of offenders within the Correctional Services Canada, and that the committee invite the Commissioner of Corrections, Ann Kelly, and Deputy Minister Sean Tupper, and officials from the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Okay.
On the amendment?
That amendment appears to be in order, so go ahead and if you wish to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify.
So basically, you're replacing this amendment.
Everything following that the committee hold, my amendment replaces the rest of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where do I even start with this? To sit here during a filibuster from the Conservatives using Paul Bernardo and the horrific crimes and the situation that these families have been put through. To suggest that anyone needs to relive that, try being a woman in this country. I don't care your age. Try being a woman, learning about those stories and hearing those stories, and to come back here as a filibuster against going through legislation is really, truly horrific. And if this is really about, I'm going to try and give my colleagues the benefit of the doubt, despite the fact, and I would be embarrassed for my colleagues opposite, and I'm going to say this so that you think when you come back to this committee, I would be embarrassed to take a subject like victims' rights on horrific crimes and you reading a canned speech that has been used on radio ads and campaign whistle stops by your leader. To use canned campaign speeches on a topic like this is truly terrible. I am going to try and take the benefit of the doubt that my honorable colleagues across the way do not understand the magnitude of hurt that making this situation political brings to women all across this country. But make no mistake that if you're truly serious about this not being partisan, you will support this amendment in its entirety. If you're truly serious about rights of victims and understanding security reclassifications, then you will support the amendment to have officials come here and explain the situation. If this is partisan, then you're going to behave differently. And Canadians will be watching, victims will be watching, and women will be watching. Because women across this country will not tolerate using crimes against women as a partisan maneuver. So, we have proposed a very meaningful amendment to come and hear from public safety and justice officials about how this actually happened. Because I want to correct the record, Mr. Chair, on a couple of things. First, C-83, which is the clause and in question that the Conservatives continuously raise, guess what? The Conservatives supported it. In addition to that, Public Safety Canada officials have actually already confirmed, but we'll do it again here in a meeting if needed, that the transfer in question and the wording that under the law that allowed it to happen existed under the Conservative government too. So if you want to talk about how to put victims' rights forward and take a victim forward-facing approach, I am all for it. But if we are going to re-victimize Canadian women and women around the world who have had to suffer, then be prepared, because I am going to show that the Conservatives are the biggest hypocrites on this issue. If you want to have a legitimate conversation about how this happened, how we can improve victims' rights, how we can make women safer in this country, I am all for it, and I will be an advocate at this table. But if you make this political with these sorts of, sorry, Mr. Chair, through the chair, if some parties make this political, then we will expose the hypocrisy and the lows that some members will go to for what they perceive as partisan gain, and I promise you it will be a miscalculation. So I'm proposing that we bring officials, we talk about how transfers happen in this country because it is independent, and we hear from the commissioners, the Commissioner of the Minister of Correctional Services Canada, the Department of Justice, and we have these conversations. And if opposition members, mainly Conservatives who have spoken so far, have a choice to make in this moment, are you going to be partisan on such horrific acts, or,
Chair.
pardon?
Through the chair.
Okay, sorry, through the chair. If some members of the opposition decide that they want this to be a partisan issue to avoid getting through C-20, women will remember, victims will remember, and we will show Canadians the lows that some members will go to for the sake of personal political gain. But if we want to talk about victims' rights, if we want to talk about how transfers in this country happen, if we want to talk about reclassification, if we want to talk about safety, then let's have that conversation. But we'll see, Mr. Chair. And on my amendment, I request a recorded vote.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. The clerk has asked if you would read that amendment once. You wouldn't have it in hard copy at this point?
I just made it because I didn't know when the
Okay.
member would bring it to the floor. Thank you. So I'll just read it in total. That the committee hold a meeting on the rights of victims of crime and the security reclassification, sorry, tell me if I'm going too fast, and reclassification and transfer of offenders within the Correctional Services Canada, period, that the committee invite the Commissioner of Corrections, Ann Kelly, and Deputy Minister Sean Tupper, and officials from the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
And that amendment replaces the motion moved.
Correct.
So next we have Madame Michaud, followed by Mr. Lloyd, followed by Mr. Biddle, followed by Mr. Motz. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very aware of the difficulty of the situation and the pain felt by the victims' families and close loved ones. To my knowledge, this transfer of prisoners is usually apolitical, and so I appreciate the government side's amendment that would allow us to hear from officials at Correctional Services Canada so that we could ask questions about the process. I think we have to make sure this remains apolitical, but of course the loved ones of victims deserve answers to questions that many of us have been asking. Before we vote on the amendment, I would like to get a French version of the new motion, the amendment. Thank you.
I believe our clerk is working on that. We'll go now to, oh, and by the way, debate at this point is on the amendment, right? Okay. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead.
I am pleased that the government has shown a willingness to have a meeting on this issue, but I don't think that's insufficient. I don't think that's sufficient. Our initial request for 5 meetings, might have been that was our initial request, and the government has put in a request for 1 meeting with correctional services officials. However, I think I would want to amend this amendment in a small way, in that I think it's important that we include some of the victims' families in this conversation, because I think it's important that we hear their perspective on how they felt on the impact of this decision, and how possibly Correctional Services Canada or other levels of government may have failed Canadians, these victims' families, by improperly notifying them or notifying them on short notice. I think it's important that our committee hear from these families. There's also an aspect in the minister's office as well that I think is important for us to explore. The minister's office was informed, but the minister has said repeatedly in the House, the previous minister, that he was unaware of this transfer. And I think that raises some very serious questions about the communications between Correctional Services Canada and the Minister's Office. So I would ask that we have representation from the Minister's Office, the political office, the Minister himself likely, at a meeting, so that we can explore that aspect. And then finally, in order so that this isn't just some exercise to say, you know, we listen to these officials come to committee and that's that and that's it, I would request that this committee report recommendations to the House on recommendations on how to prevent this incident from happening again. And so that would be my proposed amendment. I would suggest that that would probably be 2 meetings or 3 meetings, and I would put that to the government. And I know my colleague, Ms. O'Connell, you know, has laid it very stark that we have to vote for her amendment or not, and we're going to be judged if we don't vote for it. But I'd like to put forward another amendment, and I think there's very good reasons for this amendment as I laid out, that we have up to 3 meetings that include representation from victims' families, representation from the Minister's Office, and the government officials that were previously cited in the original amendment, so that we can have a comprehensive overview of what failed in the situation, and that we report any recommendations we have to the House, so that the government can see these recommendations and hopefully make the necessary changes to ensure that this terrible incident does not happen again. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amendment on that.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to suspend and get caught up here a little bit. So you're moving a sub-amendment. We can't go any deeper than that. But we've gone through an hour of our 2 hours. There's no way we're going to finish this today. So I'd ask the committee's support to thank the witnesses and their legislative clerk for being here. We appreciate it, and you may be, I believe, if we have support of the committee, we'd like to excuse you as we carry on with this matter.
Order? Or sorry.
Mr. Biddle on a point of order.
I have to go in a couple minutes, and I was hoping if if I can get my thoughts on the record for 2 minutes before I do have to leave the room.
Absolutely. So, so you'll be speaking to Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment, really?
Certainly.
So will I invite our legislative clerk, if you wish, to leave as well? This is all fun, but and then thank you all. And Mr. Biddle, if you'd like to do your intervention, and then we'll suspend and get caught up. Okay, Mr. Biddle, please go ahead.
Mr. Shipley, in reading letters from local council, pretending to understand what Niagara went through at the time, even going so far as to say people my age wouldn't understand the significance of this. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Shipley, I remember the terror in my mom's eyes. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Shipley, I remember the terror in my mom's eyes. I remember the terror in our community. I grew up in Mr. Baldinelli's riding. Grew up in the city of Niagara Falls, which is next door to my community, where many of the crimes happen, for the individual who I won't name. And throughout this debate from June, it has been clear that this is a partisan exercise, that if it was a matter of public safety, that members of Parliament wouldn't be so gleeful to mention the name of the serial killer in this place, that they wouldn't read canned speeches prepared by the 20-somethings sitting behind them who have no knowledge of this but are passing up notes that their leader said, and we need to hit all the talking points, Mr. Chair. There are real people who've been hurt by this. There's even a suggestion by Mr. Lloyd, and we should bring in the victims' families. Have they been asked? Have they been asked? Have they been consulted? Or are we just going to ask them without knowing for partisan purposes? We're supposed to be debating legislation, but instead of this being a quick motion, we're now an hour into this to try to pick at the scab of a hurt community. I agree that we should look at this, and I support Ms. O'Connell's amendment because there's a lot of misinformation on this, Mr. Chair. This is an independent process. Mr. Motts was a police officer, is my understanding. The mayor's office didn't call up him and tell him which crimes to prosecute, which criminals to go after, which jail to put them in. That was his decision. Within the criminal code, he had discretion. He was an official. And now he's pretending that that doesn't exist to make a partisan point. Again, using the name of a serial killer that harmed my community. And I've said this publicly. I believe Mr. Baldinelli's actions are genuine, and he is bringing forward the hurt of the community. The rest of the members are, again, reading canned speeches and talking points. It's outrageous, Mr. Chair. Canadian people deserve better. Niagara deserves better than this. And I hope we have a look at this to show Canadians that this is an apolitical exercise, that there is a rule of law in this country, and that politicians don't interfere in this process. And I'm sure we could all say, in this case, wouldn't it be great if we could interfere just in this one case? Wouldn't it be great? And maybe you probably get most Canadians lined up with that. That sets a dangerous precedent. Or maybe we should pass knee-jerk unconstitutional legislation. Wouldn't that be great? But then that drags the family through years of court proceedings to the Supreme Court. What does that do? To score a couple cheap political points. Niagara deserves better. The families deserve better. And I hope this motion passes. I'm sorry I have to leave for a community event, which is an organization and Mr. Baldinelli's riding. It's here in Ottawa. Canadians deserve better than this, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. So, Mr. Moss will be next, but I'm proposing that we suspend and get caught up on the motions.
First of all, I'd like to respond to a couple of errors in my colleagues across the way.
Mr. Moss, do we want to just suspend while we get
Well, I
caught
think
up?
while it's fresh, we need to respond.
Okay, I'll let you
Thank you, Chair.
do that, and then
My
we'll
colleague
do-
across the way, Ms. O'Connell, suggested that the Conservatives supported C-83. That is not what happened. C-83 was voted down by the Conservatives, passed by the Liberals in 2019. And that's so to make this a partisan issue that Conservatives are somehow complicit because the Liberals failed to do their job and the minister failed to do his job and reverse the role of this transfer, and he could have. If you didn't listen to, Mr. Biddle obviously didn't listen either to the comments that were made by myself in regards to the acknowledgement that CSC followed the law. The law is an error. The whole idea of Mr. Baldinelli's bill is to suggest that we need to correct the error. And that's the whole point of our conversation today. We can't allow this to continue to happen. So we have to change the legislation. That's the whole purpose behind this. So whether we have 3 meetings or 5 meetings, it doesn't matter. But the idea is a committee, we have a responsibility to ensure that this doesn't keep happening, that we don't have people who are a risk to public safety transferred, again, to minimum security or medium security facilities where they're and the impact, you talked about the impact of families. Well, maybe the communities certainly have spoken on what this did for those communities during the transfer of something that happened years and years ago. So, this is not a partisan issue. I have no intentions of making it a partisan issue. However, the blame needs to be placed squarely on where it is, and that is the Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino, failed to deal with this when he could have. Yes, CSC followed the law. That doesn't mean the law was perfect. That doesn't mean the law was right. It was flawed, which is why the Conservatives voted against it in 2019. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Motz. So we'll suspend for a few minutes while the clerk gets caught up with our motions. Dane, if you kind of get with the clerk to make sure he's captured your motion, your amendment. So we'll suspend for 10 minutes. Call this meeting back to order, everybody. Yeah, we have Peter, Julian, and then you, and then you. Okay, just hang on. I got to get caught up here.
I'd like to make a quick point of order.
Yes, go ahead with your point of order.
I do know that the clerk did circulate my sub-amendment, but I just want to clarify for everyone at the committee that there were two parts, key parts. That
I'll
were
come back to you on
relevant.
that. I'm aware of them, and I'll, if I forget, let me know. But
I just want to ensure that everyone's aware, because we're still discussing my
yeah.
sub-amendment, are we not?
So just to recapitulate, the main motion was moved by Mr. Shipley, and we all have copies of that. Ms. O'Connell has amended, proposed an amendment to that motion, which basically replaces it all with what you see on the paper that you've been given. And Mr. Lloyd has made a sub-amendment, proposed a sub-amendment to that, which is, as you see it on the paper, with two things that are missing. One is that we also request the findings of the study to be reported to the House. And the other one is that we also invite officials from the Minister of Public Safety. Is that correct?
Minister of Public, his political office.
Okay.
Or the minister.
So, okay. So we're all clear on this?
Sorry? The who? The political-
Officials from the political officials from the Minister of Public Safety. Is that correct?
Well, if I have the chair, maybe to clarify for Mr. Julian, my intention is that because it's well known that there was a breakdown in communication between the bureaucracy and the minister's office, I want to have a representative from the Minister of Public Safety's office, including could be the minister himself, to answer for why there was this breakdown in communication between Correctional Services Canada and the Public Safety Minister's office, because as the previous Public Safety Minister testified, he wasn't aware of this transfer until right when it happened. And I think victims would like to know why the Minister of Public Safety was not informed of this transfer when CSC originally raised it with his office.
So let's not argue the point yet. Are we clear about the change? Okay. So the debate continues on Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment. And I have Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Connell, followed by Mr. Lloyd. So, Mr. Julian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we have a responsibility at Public Safety. We've always worked together, I think, effectively. This is an important issue, and I support the amendment that Ms. O'Connell just offered in terms of bringing forward the Commissioner of Correctional Services, the Deputy Minister, and officials of Justice and Public Safety to appear. I would suggest as well that in a separate motion, we really need to request that the new Minister of Public Safety come here. And this is on a mandate that obviously touches this issue, but would give us a couple of hours with officials. I would go beyond the officials and say that the Minister himself, as the new Minister of Public Safety, I think would understand the importance of coming before this committee to be questioned on a number of issues. So, avec ça, qu'est-ce que j'aimerais suggérer, parce que je peux...
So what I would like to suggest is if we drop Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment and come back to Ms. O'Connell's amendment, I would be prepared to move a second motion to ask the Minister of Public Safety to appear here as soon as possible before this committee to answer all our questions. And of course, that would include this question, which is very important.
Your points are well taken. I think a motion of that kind would be useful, although we can't make it at this point. We can't just drop Mr. Lloyd's amendment. We have to vote on it. So if everyone is ready to vote on it, we can carry on, and we can do so. Otherwise, we have Ms. O'Connell followed by Mr. Lloyd to speak. If they want to speak to Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment, then we need to go ahead. And if they don't, if they wish to speak on the main motion, maybe we could vote on Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment. So did you want to speak to the sub-amendment?
I can wait, Mr. Chair, if, I can remove my name, but I'd like it put back on for the main motion. However, if this does turn into a filibuster, if Mr. Lloyd wants to speak to his sub-amendment and we can get to a vote, I'm fine with that. Otherwise, if this is turning into a filibuster further, then I'd like to make sure my name is back on that list.
I've put your name next after
Thank
Mr. Lloyd.
Okay.
Mr. Lloyd, did you wish to speak to your sub-amendment?
Yeah, I'll just try to reiterate what the sub-amendment. I believe we should have about 3 meetings. I believe that these meetings should include representatives, as Ms. O'Connell said, from Correctional Services Canada and Public Safety Canada. I believe that we need to have some sort of representation from victims to illustrate, the impact that this had on victims, because I think we need to, I understand people's feelings. Of course, we want to protect victims, but it's important for victims' rights, for victims to have a voice, and some voice, an appropriate voice, that I'm sure this committee can find an appropriate voice to pass on their concerns over what happened in this case and other cases that may be related to this. And that we have representation from the Minister of Public Safety's office to illustrate what happened with this breakdown in communication between Correction Services Canada, Public Safety Canada, and the Minister's office. And that this committee report to the House, because I believe if we don't, collect our observations and our conclusions and make recommendations, then I think we're really failing in our duty to improve, try to improve the situation so that these things don't happen again. And so with that, I'd be happy to move the sub-amendment to a vote so we can move it along. But I think there's other speakers.
Mr. Julian, did you wish to speak to sub-amendment?
Yes, just one point I wanted to raise. In terms of the findings going to the House, that really is a committee decision that I'm open to, but it's not something we would normally take at this point. A motion to refer something to the House normally is the content either of the motion itself or after, when we have a report or recommendations. So I guess what I wanted to do is reassure Mr. Lloyd that ultimately the committee can decide to forward recommendations to the House, but it's not really germane to the motion that is before us.
We can certainly decide to send it to the House later on if we wish, but it is common procedure, if you will, when we pass a motion for study that blah, 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 that we report our results to the House. So I think it's kind of pretty standard language. So anyway, Is there any further comment on sub-amendment? Mr. Shipley?
Just briefly, this is all a matter of trying to negotiate the right situation to make sure everybody's heard here. We started off at 0. We were asking for 5, went down to 1. Now we're down to 3. I think in good faith, we're somewhere in the middle. We didn't meet last week. We could have had a couple meetings, so we can't talk about we don't have enough time. So I really think that 3 is a good compromise. I think we do good work at 3, and I'm hoping that the rest of the committee can see that, we don't want to be rushed. If, as Mr. Lloyd said, if we get if they're willing to come, some representation of the victims to come, they need to be heard and not rushed. So I think 3 is a good compromise. So let's see who's willing to compromise in our first meeting.
Thank you. Madame Michaud, do you wish to, sur le sous-amendment?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The vice chairs had discussions during the suspension. I thought we had already reached a compromise. Mr. Julian alluded to it when he said that in any case, the entire committee agreed to invite the Minister of Public Safety in private. So why not have one meeting, as Ms. O'Connell's amendment suggests, to discuss that specific situation, and then have a meeting as soon as possible with the minister, and it will be up to the members of the Conservative Party to ask the minister any questions they may have about this specific issue. So I think this compromise of 3 meetings makes sense. I think we should move to a vote. Thank you.
Debate on sub-amendment? Go ahead.
I'll be brief, just to address the comments made there. My concern is that if we don't have the minister participate or some participation from his office in this study, and if it's just having the minister come speak about his new role, I'm concerned we won't be able to include any testimony from the minister in that study. And maybe the clerk can tell me, but if the minister comes for another reason and we ask him questions about this study, can we include his responses in that study if he's not been specifically invited as a witness for that study? And I think if I know the answer to that, then we can be more clear about which direction we're going in.
I'll ask the clerk. I believe we can decide to incorporate results of other studies if we wish. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Okay. So did you want to speak to sub-amendment?
I actually have a couple questions of clarification, so yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I'm just trying to keep up with this, but the sub-amendment provided by Mr. Lloyd or moved by Mr. Lloyd does not include language, and this is around Mr. Julian's point, around a study. My amendment has that we're holding a meeting. So I would need clarification on how a meeting automatically becomes a study. And if you could quote the exact reference. Because I've never held, I've sat on many committees, there's been meetings of topics of particular interest, and it does not automatically mean it's a study unless you include in your motion specific text, which is not on the floor as I understand it. I want a clarification from the clerk. It was was there an amendment moved or another sub-amendment moved to make this a study?
So Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendments changes it from 1 meeting to 3 meetings.
Mm-hmm.
It adds other, inviting the members of the family,
Mm-hmm.
Asking for members of the representatives to the minister's office,
Mm-hmm.
and that we report our findings to the House.
But-
In my understanding, everything we do is a study, whether we call it a study or not. So we can report whatever we like to the House. But I'll defer to the clerk, who can advise us with great wisdom.
So procedurally, that we include or not study in the motion. Procedurally, it becomes, if we have a meeting, it becomes a study by itself, and it's written like it on the website. So that's why I'm.
Okay, fair enough. So then, because that's not said in the paper that we passed around, I just want to be very clear on what we would be voting on first. The sub-amendment would be no less than 3 meetings, representatives from victim families, and that the report be reported back to the House, correct?
And
That's
also-
all as one.
Yes, and also that we include an invitation to representatives from the Minister of Public Safety.
Okay. So with that clarification, I just want to speak to these couple of items, and then I would hope we can get to a vote on the sub-amendment and then my amendment. In terms of 3 meetings, you know, as my colleagues have pointed out, we were trying to come to a compromise, but, you know, I'm asking what's at the 3 meetings? What is so, you know, why is it the number 3 instead of just agreeing to the content and the need of the meetings? And, you know, this is not, you know, I think this is just really, again, if this is turning into something partisan, I think it's just some sort of, you know, compromise, but it's not about making our work here better. In terms of representatives from victims' families, like, if we are truly trying to talk about legislation and the facts, I'm not going to reiterate how hurtful this is. And then lastly, this suggestion to bring representatives from the minister's office. You know, there's ministerial accountability. We don't drag minister's staff in front of committees. And, you know, if that's the practice that Conservatives want to get into, I think it's just completely wrong. There have been notices of motions, and I know we can't get into the details until they're on the floor, but there's already been comments today about inviting the minister on his overall mandate, which is completely reasonable and fair, and I'm sure the minister has no issues with that. And if there are questions of the minister in terms of, you know, staff in the former office or current office, then direct those questions to the minister. But I think this is completely inappropriate to try and drag staff to committee as a way for the Conservatives to try and use this as, again, some sort of political advantage. I think we need to get back to the work of this committee. There have been many compromises being proposed. Let's bring in the Commissioner of Correctional Services, Deputy Minister, officials from Justice and Public Safety, and let's have that conversation. So with that, Mr. Chair, I won't be supporting the sub-amendment, and I hope we can get to the amendment and move on with, I think, what was a very reasonable compromise. And I will personally certainly relay the message back to Minister LeBlanc that the committee would like to see him on his mandate. And if there's a formal motion presented, that's great. But if not, I will also just relay that sentiment.
Thank you. We have Mr. Lloyd, followed by Mr. Shipley, and we have 15 minutes left to get through all this.
Yes. So my sub-amendment was based upon the belief that if we didn't have the minister come in to testify on what happened for these 3 meetings, that we wouldn't be able to include that in the study. So based upon clarification with the clerk, we can ask the minister about this in a separate meeting, and those findings can then be included in any report to the House that we're proposing. I want to be clear that, there's been changeover in the minister's office, and so we're certainly not, picking and choosing to drag staff to committee. We're leaving it to the minister's office to decide. If it's the minister himself, which I believe, yes, minister accountability is key, then that would be our ideal solution for this. But that being said, I'm willing to drop having the minister because as we said, we are having him come at another meeting, and we can ask some questions on this. So the key thing is that we would like to include representation from victims to talk about their side of the story and how they feel about, processes that can be improved to ensure that victims' rights are being respected. And then the officials that were listed by Ms. O'Connell, so that I think we would cover all the bases that I'm asking for. So I've asked for 3 bases to be covered. I've asked for victim's point of view or, through the representation, whatever appropriate that may be, a political office point of view through the minister when he comes on a separate matter, and then the government point of view through the professional civil service. And I think if we've covered all 3 of those bases, we could have 2 meetings on this and accomplish this. So.
I've written a lot of software that way, by the way. Some of it
This
actually
isn't
worked.
serious.
Okay, so I'm in a bit of a procedural bind here because we have a sub-amendment. We can't change the sub-amendment, right? But I appreciate your changes. Another sub-amendment could be moved after this one is dealt with. Okay, so is there any, Madame Michaud, did you wish to speak? No? Okay. All right, so the vote is on the sub-amendment. You wanted a recorded? Okay, so all in favor of the sub-amendment? 4, all opposed? Not carried, okay. So we are back to Ms. O'Connell's amendment. So is there any further discussion on Ms. O'Connell's amendment? No? Mr. Lloyd?
I guess I'll just move another sub-amendment then to reflect the changes that I discussed before the vote. I guess it's unnecessary to say report to the House because we've already discussed that these things are always considered a study generally. And so I'd say that the committee hold 2 meetings on the rights, that the committee hold 2 meetings on the rights of crime victims and the security reclassification and transfer of offenders within federal corrections, and that the committee invite the Commissioner of Correctional Services Canada, Ann Kelly, Deputy Minister Sean Tupper, and officials of Justice and Public Safety Canada to appear. The committee also, and this would be the amendment or sub-amendment, that the committee also request, I guess how would I word this, but
Representatives from victim family be invited?
representatives from victims' families as appropriate to discuss their perspective.
Okay, so you're going to basically move this.
Point of order.
Yes?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that that motion is out of order as we've already voted on it and it lost.
There's a different amendment. So
Different numbers.
Not going to win this one here. I know procedure much better than this. So you can keep trying and you'll keep looking silly.
I think there are significant differences. So Mr. Lloyd is moving to replace a meeting with 2 meetings or no less than 2 meetings.
2 meetings.
2 meetings, and adding at the end that representatives from victim family be invited to participate. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I think once again it's incredibly disappointing that this is proving that the Conservatives are using this as a partisan filibuster, a horrific topic, as a partisan filibuster, because it is very clear to anybody watching they are making amendments and decisions on this like it's the back of a napkin. If they were serious about victims' rights, then they would have come prepared with something that isn't piecemeal. Oh, I meant to add this, I meant to say this, now I'm saying this, but no, wait, did I not say that? How do I word this? Come on, Mr. Chair, we are trying to do real work on this committee about protecting victims, and I think the members opposite should quit while they are very clearly not ahead, and they are embarrassing themselves when it comes to an issue as serious and sensitive as this. that we don't conduct ourselves in this manner. I think we've come to a reasonable compromise about having a very real conversation about a very real and serious topic. And if they want to continue in this manner, Canadians will be judging. And like I said, women will see that an issue like this is being used in such a flippant way. So I will not be supporting this sub-amendment attempt, and I hope we can get to the amendment.
Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I take a little exception to say we've come here on the back of a napkin. We actually came in here with an amendment in both official languages, ready to go.
Motion, yeah.
With a motion, sorry. Everything that's been done after our motion has been flippant here on the fly on the back of a napkin. So it's actually completely backwards. We submitted ours properly through the clerk in advance in both official languages. So there's been nothing done willy-nilly here. It's been done proper from the beginning. Ms. O'Connell mentioned a couple of times this is a serious and sensitive issue. Yes, it's very serious and very sensitive. It's so serious that we need more than one meeting on it.
Yep.
If it's so serious, let's get serious. Let's get into this and figure things out. One meeting isn't serious.
Yeah.
I don't know anything we've ever done where we solved an issue in one meeting. We need more time than that. This is we heard earlier, some very sensitive, very emotional discussions. Let's not rush through this. Let's do this properly. Let's all come to a senses that we need more than one. I don't know how anybody can think we can do a serious and sensitive meeting in one meeting. That's not serious to me. Let's get serious. Let's do 3 meetings. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's move forward. Let's let those victims, the representative victims, be heard. We can't force them to come. The ones that are going to come are the ones that want to come and be heard. I heard Mr. Biddle say earlier that, that was shameful that we were asking to be heard. Well, they don't have to come, but the ones who want to be heard will show up. And let's let them be heard. Let's let them hear, let them speak as to what they've been through, what happened to them back on June 1st when this heinous Mr. Bernardo was moved from maximum security to medium. I'm sure it caused them great stress and hardship. Let's get serious. Let's hear about it. So I can't support one meeting. One meeting is not serious. If we're actually going to talk about being serious, let's get serious and let's do. We wanted 5. We'll only go down to 3. Let's do 3 meetings. And all.
3 meeting is not on the table. It's 2
Or
meetings.
2, sorry.
Okay.
2 plus the minister.
So we're running out of time here. Can we vote on Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment? All in favor of Mr. Lloyd's sub-amendment? All opposed? Defeated. Okay. I don't suppose it's reasonable to ask if we can vote on Are we ready to vote on Ms. O'Connell's amendment?
Yep. Yep, I think we have agreement. Can we call the question?
Okay. All in favor of Ms. O'Connell's amendment?
I had asked for it.
Oh, sorry, we wanted a recorded vote? Mm-hmm. Mr. Clerk, would you conduct a recorded vote, please?
Ms. O'Connell,
Yes.
Mr. Callaway,
Yes.
Mr. Gahir,
In favor?
Mr. MacDonald, Monsieur Chiffquier,
Oui.
Mr. Shipley,
No.
Mr. Lloyd,
No.
Mr. Matz,
No.
Mr. Melillo. Madame Michaud,
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
Oui.
7 in favor.
Okay, Ms. O'Connell's amendment passed, it carries. We still have to go now to the main motion, which is now, we have one more vote to do. So I think it's essentially the same, I don't think we need any more discussion. Do we need more discussion? Mr. Lloyd, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm disappointed that we've had to get to this point. I believe the Conservatives have been completely reasonable. We were initially asking for 5 meetings, which we felt would be appropriate to meet the requirements for coming up with serious recommendations that could help prevent situations like this from happening again. But I think we showed a willingness when the government came forward with a sub-amendment to suggest that we have 1 meeting. We could not, in good conscience, support 1 meeting with just Correctional Services Canada officials. We feel that, this is a multidimensional situation involving victims' rights, involving practices of our civil service, and involving the practices that go on inside ministers' offices. And in order for us, by moving this amendment, the government has basically prevented us from hearing the very important perspectives of victims and how they feel about these practices being carried out by Correctional Services Canada, how they feel about what happened with the minister's office. And so we couldn't in good conscience vote for only having 1 meeting on this matter. And so we showed our willingness to compromise, and we were pushing for 2 meetings on this matter, plus an additional meeting with the minister, which would have been a meeting that we were already planning already with the minister, and seeking to include any testimony that we might ask, taking away our time as opposition to ask them about many, many important issues from public safety. We were going to sacrifice our time to ask those very important questions so that we could ask specifically on these matters. And so I think, our side has shown Canadians that we are willing to work with all parties in order to get a result that is acceptable to Canadians. And the fact that we're moving forward with just 1 meeting, I think is insufficient. It's completely insufficient to give Canadians, I think, and victims' families the assurance that this government is doing everything that they can to ensure that this situation doesn't happen again. We were asking for 2 meetings, Mr. Chair, 2 meetings, including a meeting where we would hear from representatives of victims to talk about their perspective. And this, this committee voted to not hear from victims. And I think that's wrong. I think it's unfortunate. And that's why we couldn't in good conscience vote for this. So I think I've been clear that, the Conservatives have shown a willingness to be very, very flexible on our initial motion. But we will not budge when it comes to supporting the rights of inclusion for victims and their families so that their perspectives can be heard. This is not just about hearing from civil servants and bureaucrats from their perspective, although that will be an important perspective to hear in order to make recommendations. This is about hearing from Canadians about how they felt that these decisions impacted them. And I think it's completely wrong that this committee voted to not include those perspectives in that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
I would wish that we would move to the main motion vote because, as I mentioned, and we've had discussions amongst all 4 parties, I would like to move that we bring the minister here. It's, I think, a little bit of a contradiction that we have the Conservatives filibustering the motion that I want to bring forward to bring the minister here. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. If we're concerned about the issue, why don't we invite the minister? The Conservatives are filibustering, so I'm not able to do that. I'm a bit confused, Mr. Chair, quite frankly, with their strategy, because it seems to me that having a meeting with the minister makes a lot of sense, and yet Conservatives seem to be blocking that opportunity to do that. And I understand we're very close now to adjournment time, so I'm very confused about their strategy, and I'm a little perplexed when we have discussions amongst all 4 parties that doesn't carry through to actually getting the committee business done.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. So I have Mr. Motz on the list. However, I would encourage us to get to a vote on the main motion, and then we can entertain other motions if we wish. Mr. Motz, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, briefly. I just wanted to bring us back to why this motion was brought forward in the first place. Canadians were shocked and outraged at the transfer. That was it. The families, the communities that these tragedies impacted were outraged across the country. People were outraged, and so here's an example. We realize that there is a deficiency in the legislation, and the attempt of this is to show that deficiency, having a study, is to show that deficiency exists, that the C-83 needs to be amended, and put pressure on government to do so. Was the intent behind this to actually have an impact, positive impact on victims, not only now, but moving forward so they feel heard. So while I agree that there has been discussions amongst our groups, amongst the parties here, I don't feel that brushing this off to one meeting actually serves the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. And I can't support one meeting, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So we now, unless there's further discussion on the main motion, which is, okay, go ahead.
I just want to once again add to my colleagues and what they were saying, and my friend from the NDP down at the end. I understand he wants to get his motion on the floor, but we believe let's do things right. Let's make sure we got the right amount of meetings in place. Let's not rush it through. We want to make sure that nothing's rushed with this. When you're talking about bringing the minister, we have been asking, I know a different minister, but we have been asking for the minister to come to this committee. I wish maybe the clerk could tell us how long that's been since the last minister came. We have been asking for that repeatedly, many, many times. We couldn't get anywhere. So we're all for the minister coming. It's just it didn't happen. So we're not holding up your motion. We'd like to get him here as much or more than yourself. So that's not an issue. We just want to make sure that things are done properly here. We have the right amount of meetings. This is a very delicate topic, a very sensitive topic, a very in-depth topic. Let's give it the right time it deserves, and let's make sure we do this with a fulsome review. One meeting, to me, just is not enough. We've seen what we can do in a meeting in here. Sometimes we don't get a lot resolved in a meeting. Case in hand. So I don't know what our timing is tonight. We talked just before this one, Chair, that we were going to have a hard stop at 6:30. Are we still? And Mr. Connell.
We
suspended for 23 minutes so we can actually extend that far. However, I would encourage us to have this vote, and if there's any time left, we could maybe hear from Mr. Julian, hear his motion. Mr. Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I obviously I've been quiet this meeting. My first intervention as a member of this committee, and it's good to be here. I obviously folks around the table. I've been a part of this work a lot longer, but coming into this with fresh eyes as a new member of the committee, I think from my perspective, just I don't want to repeat what's been said, but just reiterate how important I think it is to have more discussion about such an important and such a sensitive topic. I mean, when we talk about public safety, I think that this is an issue like this obviously has to be right at the forefront of it. So don't know if it will be a lost cause or not, but I wanted to continue to implore my colleagues around the table to reconsider only having one meeting on this topic, just given the gravity of it and given the importance. Again, a new member, I don't have all of the experience that some of the other folks have around here, but I definitely think that this is something that we have to reconsider, and I'd urge everyone to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Malio. Okay. Any further, Mr. Mutz?
There's I guess there's a bigger picture here we need to look at. There's a view on the other side that this is a filibuster process. I think the government has some legislation that they are pretty anxious to get through this committee. And we came here with hat in hand with great intentions of saying, you know what, let's have a few meetings. We started with 5. We can settle on 2, plus the minister when he comes, as per Mr. Julian's anticipated motion. And I think that's reasonable, because if we don't, I will tell you that I think there is a very strong probability that the government getting their legislation through in a timely way may not happen. And that's unfortunate. There's some important pieces of legislation that need to get through. And we've been working on it for a while. There's other ones coming up that are important. But this is something that we feel we've been asked by Canadians to take a stand on this, and we will, and we are. And so it's critical, absolutely critical, that our government representatives here at this committee understand that we're willing to work with them to pass government legislation. But to do so, we also require some concessions on things that have come to our attention from the Canadian people who on matters that are important to them. Hearing from victims is one of those issues, and victims groups on the impact that this has on the the justice system, and on what Canadians think of that justice system. And we have an opportunity to meet and hear and have Canadians be heard. And so I guess the ball is in the government's court. If they want legislation passed in a timely way, then let's. It's true. I mean, no, you are.
Let's not have any crosstalk, please. Let's get to this vote.
The list has been exhausted. Can we please vote?
Okay. I'm sorry. Are you wishing to intervene? Yeah, I have a bit more. You have a bit more? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Actually,
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Actually, Mr. Julian was next. Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
I'm a bit concerned. Here we have the Public Complaints Commission. The public has been calling for. We have legislation that we have to go through. It was an important issue that was raised today, and I certainly agree. It merits committee time, which is why the rights of crime victims is now on the table. And we are trying to vote on that, to establish that, trying to vote to get the minister to come in, both to speak to the issue of the rights of crime victims, but also to speak to other public safety issues. And I understand now that this is a filibuster where the Conservatives are saying, no, that's not enough, that we need another meeting. And they haven't actually made the case in a very comprehensive way. So what I would suggest to my Conservative colleagues, because this is a minority parliament, no one party can impose its will. We have to work together. We should work together. That's certainly what Canadians expect of us. And on issues like the rights of crime victims, for public safety to undertake that, which we're trying to do, we're trying to have that vote so we can actually move forward with this. We're trying to allow me to move the motion so that the Minister of Public Safety comes here. And Conservatives are saying, no, we're not going to permit either of those votes because we want another meeting. They can always move that motion at another time. We can always have those discussions. We can have those discussions offline. If they make a compelling case, I'm certainly prepared to listen to it. But when a party or members say they really believe this issue is important, but we're not going to have any votes to have those meetings, I can see the contradiction. And it's a bit hypocritical, quite frankly, Mr. Chair, to say this is an important issue, but we're going to block consideration and vote so we can actually have those issues investigated thoroughly at public safety. I find that contradiction surprising. I find the issue itself is extremely important. Victims, the rights of crime victims is fundamental. And yet I'm surprised that rather than coming to a conclusion tonight, the Conservative MPs on this committee are withholding the ability of this committee to make those decisions and have those investigated, have those issues investigated on behalf of Canadians. I think I can see the contradiction. I think Canadians can see the contradiction. I would ask through you to them, Mr. Chair, that they stop the filibuster, allow the two votes, one to have the meeting on the rights of crime victims, thoroughly investigated with the Commissioner of Correctional Services, extremely important, And secondly, to have the Minister of Public Safety come here so that they can ask those questions, that I can ask those questions, that all members of the committee can ask those questions, so that we come out of this meeting with a plan. And if they want to add to it later, I am fully willing to listen to them on their case. But I find the contradiction of not allowing the votes and not allowing us to proceed when they say that this is an important issue. I find that that contradiction quite clear. And I would ask through you, Mr. Chair, that they stop the contradiction and allow the votes to be held so we can get going on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree we've got some important legislation ahead of us. I do want to remind my colleague at the end that C-20 has twice now died on the order papers and not been brought through. So this is the third time we've tried to get that through. So that's unfortunate that we're even discussing that again. But I would like to propose a sub-amendment, if I could, Chair, please.
We are on the main motion.
Yes.
Or an amendment, sorry. Thanks.
So you wish to amend the motion as amended by Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
It's in order.
Thank you. I would like to add a couple of subsections and a couple of people that would be important to come to this meeting. Now, we add these on. It'll be a very busy meeting. We might have to go late that night, too. I would like to add on that we invite the corrections investigator and the Office of the Federal Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime to the motion, and I'll speak to that. Oh, perhaps, do we need to get that in from, as we did with Ms.
Well,
O'Connell's?
let's get the amendment clear, and then we'll see whether we need to
I
write
think
it
we
up.
need to get that in
We're
both.
actually not gonna, we're gonna have to close up shop right now. We're kind of running out of time. We're not gonna be able to get to, we're not gonna be able to finish this motion today, it looks like. So perhaps,
We can continue with this one next Wednesday?
That's what we're going to probably have to do, unless we can, I mean, if we could vote on what we've got now and then move a motion to, okay. Well,
No, just a humble.
I think we have to, adjourn, and we will resume at this point in the debate, and begin again on this matter when we resume on Wednesday. So with that understanding, we are adjourned.